Welcome to the All Access Entertainment Podcast. I am your host, Joseph Bruen, here this week, a longtime New England wrestler and trainer. Ladies and gentlemen, Chris Blackheart, welcome to the show.
Joe, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Pleasure to have you here. Take a deep dive into your career like we always do. Let's rewind to the very beginning, Chris. Growing up as a child or young adult, when did you first discover pro wrestling? Who were some of your favorites?
I discovered it, I like to say in the late 70s. So I grew up in Brockton, and the Brockton Fair used to come around all the time. And I loved seeing Demolition Derby and pro wrestling. And back then we watched it on WLBI Channel 56. I believe it was on at 12 o'clock. And I remember as a kid, you used to have the blackouts, the big X's going across the screen. And I think the first time I really can remember something like that, I think it was Killer Khan breaking Andre the Giant's leg. And that was, I'm not sure what year that was, but that's, some of the first memories of watching it on TV. But I was just instantly hooked, because like as a kid, I played sports. You did Little League and basketball, but it was something about pro wrestling. It had that hook, and that was my sport. Obviously people would want to be Major League Baseball players, football players, but I'm like, man, I don't know how to get into this, man, but I'd love to get into it, when I was older. And that's really how everything happens. And ironically, when we interview kids, and people for the school to train, almost everybody has the same story. They grew up with it as a kid, and I always like to find their timeline of when they started watching it and why. But the story's the same. And I think that's the awesome part with pro wrestling is on paper, there's no reason why these people should be hanging out a couple of days a week, between, nationality, income, education, background. But pro wrestling brings all these people together. And that's the part that I think is awesome about pro wrestling.
And when did you actually attend your very first show? Do you remember, for whether it be WWF or whatever?
As for WWF, I remember as a kid, we always used to have to try to go to, like, it was Providence or Boston. I remember as a kid, we went to some in Providence. And I grew up in Brockton, so that was a far drive back then, in 1970 something or 80, whatever. So I went to a couple of shows, remember, in Providence with my dad. But a lot of it started off, again, going to the Brockton Fair. That was the highlight every summer, going to the Brockton Fair, which turned into going to Kowalski shows at Brockton High School. So I remember for my birthday, a lot of times, I think it was the firefighters were putting it on. So for my birthday, my next door neighbor, the Thomases, they would give me those tickets. So ironically, when I look back at it, some of the guys that you forget were there are the guys that now. I remember Dave Starr used to be like the local, heel. And, and then you have Muldoon, and then you have, Bert Centeno, and then, you look back at it, as a kid to now, it's like how the circuit worked. Like, you knew Kowalski was running the show because at least his name was on the marquee for it. But then you had the guys coming in. You had Sweet Hansen would come in, and Jose Luis Rivera, and then you had Abdul the Butcher and Ted Arcidi. So you didn't know what was going on, but you look back at it now, you're like, oh, that's how it happened.
Yeah.
So it was, and that was cool. I can't remember seeing Sergeant Muldoon there, but I know he was there. And also like Brian Walsh, because you talk to Sarge and they used to have matches up and down, the coast. But it's just funny, again, you never saw it, Right. And I remember that time, especially at the Brockton Fair, you would have, Brian Walsh versus, Dave Starr. And I remember the funny story with Dave. Obviously, I didn't know him, but I was bartending in Whitman, which is, I believe, David's hometown.
Mm.
And I remember he came in. This was a couple of years, probably after he retired, and I was starting, training at Kowalski's, and it was just he was kind of set back. Like, I said, hey, I probably said something like, "Do you used to wrestle? Are you Dave Starr?" And he was just kind of taken back because a lot of times, people just don't know they don't know, and with wrestling, they either love it or they hate it.
Yeah.
So in my case, I loved it because when I told him when I used to see him wrestle the Brockton Fair, it was just a little bit different.
And was it those WWF shows or was it the IWF with Kowalski, attending those where you realize, okay, this is something that I want to do personally?
It was all the above. It was between watching it on TV because back then, I didn't know about Jack Witchies because
Mm.
I grew up that when Witchies burnt down, I was probably like 5, and I don't think I ever went to Witchies. So I can't say there was one show or one match that got me hooked on being it. I just knew once I started it, that's all I would watch.
Yeah.
You know,
And
you,
once you started that, what were some of those initial thoughts when you're seeing everything in the school and arriving at your training for the first time? Kind of take us through that story.
so looking for training or
Looking for training, yeah, kind of
yeah,
figuring
so
it all
back,
out.
yeah, so I mean that was so people have to realize back then there was no internet. Well, the internet was starting to say the least back in '97. So I started looking probably like in 90, 91, 92. So basically, I was finishing high school, and the hook for me was Kowalski used to write a Sunday article in the Herald. By that time, I was working at a hotel, and every Sunday I would make sure I would grab that paper just to read that article. And at the bottom of it, Kowalski would have his PO box. So I finally, wrote him a letter, and then he gave me he wrote back, and I was like, wow, Killer Kowalski wrote me back. And then he called me, and what I should have done, I should have, and I don't remember if Walter left his number, but I probably should have called it back.
Yeah.
Instead, I started looking for the school because that time it was involved in. And originally, when I started looking for it, I couldn't find it. And then, I went to college and I still loved wrestling. I still wanted to get involved in it. And then finally, it's probably my third or fourth attempt, in the late 96, 97, I found it. And I found it by accident. I went to Malden. I remember I parked somewhere and I started walking up down. I couldn't find it. I could not find the school. And eventually the police department was right there. And I walked in and I asked them if hey, any idea where the Killer Kowalski School of Pro Wrestling is? And they're like, I have no idea. I'm like, how can you not know? You live in Malden. This is, a legend. And I remember when I was leaving there, I just started hearing the bang of what I thought was a wrestling ring. Now, I know, you go to the matches, you hear things. And I started literally following it down the street because the police department was down the street from Richard Burns's Taekwondo. And that's where Walter had the school at the time. So I just remember the windows must have been open. I just really followed it. And then I saw Taekwondo and I just walked up the Emerald stairs and that's how I found it. So it was by accident. Again, I have no idea if Walter had a phone number, in the letter in the voicemail. It probably would have been easier if I called, and I probably would have started much earlier. Because at that time, I think when I initially was starting, I started college and I came back my sophomore year. Lived back in the area, so I probably could have started 92, 93 instead of 97.
Mm.
So but when I first started, it was like as Walter Killer Kowalski, and it was definitely you have instant respect, between everyone always says about his handshake, a very firm handshake, and just the voice. And you just followed, what he said.
Now, how did that initial meeting go when you got up those stairs and introduced yourself?
Um, I can't remember everything. I was just you're always happy to be there,
Yeah.
because wow, I finally found it. And then you're like, wow, just instant respect. credibility because of who he was. And then it was just, when do you want to start? At that time it was, I think it was $2,000 in 4 payments or a one time of 1,500 or 1,750, and you paid that, and then you would wrestle. Well,
Yeah.
you attempt to start the training process.
Mm.
And to this day, and even back almost 30 years ago, you had a lot of guys, and it drives me nuts to this day when people come in and they have a name of of a gimmick, and their name, and the whole backstory, and they had that back when I started, and I realized back then if you came in with a name and a gimmick, and at that time they were airbrushing everything, you probably weren't going to last. And
Yeah.
that's usually the case. And to this day, I tell when people come in and they hey, I have a question. I say, all right, what's your question? They go, oh, I have a gimmick. I'm like, don't tell me. They go, what? I said, just put it in a box and save it. Save it until you're good enough to use it, because you're probably not going to do it justice. Because when you start, you're probably going to suck.
Yeah.
And because we all, and when you first start, it's like anything else. You can't be good at the beginning. And it just is, you got to get your reps in. You got to get time in. So a lot of times when people are in the business and they're growing, and then when either we come up with a gimmick for them based on what we see, or we can trickle in a little bit of what they may have. But some days the gimmick is just so much better than what they are in the ring, and you don't want to ruin it.
Any memories of superstar Richard Byrne?
Not really. Like obviously it was his place. I remember he came out a couple of times, and he would just give like a bag of gear. It's like anybody wants, it was like $10 for tights. I remember I bought some stuff, from Richard. And I remember I wrestled him, I think it was once. And ironically, it's the first time I met Rocky Raymond. So
Okay.
it was an outside show, and I didn't know Rocky. I had no idea who Rocky was. I just knew he was a ring announcer. And I knew who Richard was. So I remember wrestling Richard, and this announcer's kind of commentating, and doing a little, his side comments. I'm like, who's this guy? And I did not like him. I'm like, I'm not going to let anyone get over me if they're not a wrestler, because that's who I thought he was. I didn't know who he was. I just thought he was an announcer. So yeah, I had instant dislike for a announcer named Rocky Raymond, to say the
Yeah.
least. And even afterwards, at the match, because he's still commentating, I'm still going, after him verbally, and but it was funny because afterwards, then you realize who he is, and I did a lot of ring rentals for Rocky, and Rocky's Rocky, and being a young guy, I think that's one thing that's kind of missing now, is a lot of the history of New England wrestling. A lot of young guys don't know it, and they don't have the opportunity to work with, some of the older talent and some of the older promoters, and to get, the good and the bad. Because I look at it now, and two of probably the most craziest promoters you hear about, is Sparta, and you hear about Rocky.
Yeah.
And I say to this day now, I'm like, I definitely know why they made me a little bit crazy, because of the talent. But yeah, it's just different, man. And to this day, like I could call Rocky right now and have an hour conversation with him. And we tell the young kids, you can learn something from everybody.
Hmm.
And Rocky being an older guy, I'm sure after that half an hour conversation, I learned something from him.
Powerhouse Wrestling was another one that I thought was kind of crazy. When back in my time when I was a ring announcer, I told Don Vega this story. It was just kind of weird. He'd book and cancel and book and cancel, and so he'd book me, he'd book other ring announcers. I guess maybe forgetting that he booked.
Yeah.
And we'd all show up at one show, and I'm like, "Oh, what are you doing here?" He's, "Oh, I'm ring announcing." I'm ring announcing.
Yeah.
And then Rich Palladino walked over. Hey, what are you guys doing here? I'm ringing. So it happened, and Rich, myself, and this other kid, we all ring announced the same show, and we're doing different matches, and so bizarre things like that would happen. And then, I remember like the promos that would be cut at Powerhouse, where the next show we got Roddy Piper and Macho Man, Mr. Perfect, and then like none of those people obviously were booked for the show.
Yeah, I mean,
So
Chris was another one that, I mean, he was kind of crazy, uh, but that's what worked, and
yeah,
he would run big shows like in the 2000s, two, three, four national talent, and they would draw. And
yeah,
ironically, he's doing a comeback now. A lot of our talent, we typically do the ring rental for him because Don
yep,
Vega's one of his bookers or talent coordinators. So we do a lot of stuff with them. And, Chris is Chris.
yeah,
You got to respect, he has a formula that works. He's trying to reinvent it, literally like 15 years later after taking
yeah,
time off.
yeah. I
Um,
have good memories there. I was always treated well. I wasn't treated poorly or anything, and Powerhouse. But it's just when I think of crazy memories or crazy promotions, Powerhouse is always on that list for me because you
yeah,
never knew
no,
what you were going to get.
Yeah, no, Sataro, he was a character. A lot of these guys were characters, and I'm sure that the young kids say that about, us now. Like Black Eyes Crazy, or like they don't understand stuff. I think the difference is we knew a lot of those guys were crazy, and there was other reasons why they were a little bit nuts. Um, but I think nowadays, I think the young kids don't realize, especially with us, because we're running a school and promotion. Everything's a learning environment, and we're always
Mm,
trying to get them better or learn from mistakes, so they're not either repeating it or they're not actually doing it the first time.
yeah. When it comes to Spada, the WWA, obviously a crazy reputation, but I always had a very positive experience there. It was actually, if I had to choose, it would probably be my favorite promotion that I had ring announced for. I was there for probably about 2 years, but it was run very professionally. Um, while I was there anyway. Obviously, there are always these crazy things that pop up, but in general, it was a positive thing. I was always paid well. I was always treated well. So I can't say anything bad about my time with WWA. Mike Spada was, he was good to me.
Yeah, I mean, and again, Spada was Spada.
Yeah,
And to this day, those stories come around all the time. And the guy's been around for a while, know the stories, and they like it. Seems like everybody has a spotter impression, to say the least, if you knew him.
yeah,
But yeah, no, it's just different time, different promoters out there, doing their own thing. Again, I think they're less crazy now because of being one of them, but I'm sure the talent doesn't always reflect that.
yeah. And a lot of the promoters now are also a lot younger. You know what I mean? So they're not
Yeah, I
they're
mean,
not grizzly vets.
no, and I think that was the difference. I mean, that kind of goes in like when we started, running shows. We started in '07. After being in the business about 10 years, for a total time frame, and we just did it because it was an opportunity, and
Yeah,
we wanted to run it. Bring in different people, cut out the political stuff because at that time, even now, there's a lot of political circles going around in wrestling, but we're pulling people from everywhere coming in, and we would, I remember, we would put our press releases out on the Burn and Hammer, see the stars of, YPW, EPW, whatever it was, and that was the hook, is that we would try to book 2 to 3 guys from different organizations and kind of melt them in to some of the matches that they would never have typically if they were running in those circles.
yeah, yeah. I feel like Showcase. I don't think I ever did. I ever ring announce for Showcase? I don't think I did.
I don't know. I'm sure I reached out, but at that time, so we started in '07. What were you doing in '07?
Oh, okay. So yeah, I mean, my ring announcing was pretty much came to an end in '08.
Yeah.
So
So
that would explain it.
yeah, so at the beginning, people don't realize this. At the beginning, we were very at the beginning was myself, Paul Lazon, and Alex Payne
Hmm.
from when we started in March. They left, I believe, in May.
Okay.
And then after that, I mean, a lot of times I would be doing the ring announcement, I'd be doing the music, I'd be doing the booking, you name it, I was doing it. And then, Derek Mulhan, figured Derek was my right hand man for years, which was phenomenal. So a lot of times Derek would do the announcing or the announcing, the music behind.
Hmm.
And I remember people came up to me, the guys in the business, and they're like, Chris, what are you doing? I'm like, what are you talking about? You know, they're like, you can't do this all yourself. I'm like, well, that's how we've been doing it, you know? So it was just the norm,
Right.
you know? And, you know, now we have different layers, you know, with Showcase between, you know, the booking and the talent and stuff like that. It does make it a little bit easier, but I can focus on the business side where typically Don Vega's doing the booking for us. He's the one dealing with the talent. So it makes it a lot easier.
Hmm. Yeah, we must have just basically missed that window because 2008 is when I was booking for APCW.
Yeah.
And I was still ring announcing for them as well as other promotions. But 2008 is also the year that I started the Hall of Fame. And then after that, I kind of just went into Hall of Fame and Fan Fest because it consumed all of my time.
Yeah.
So that's why I got rid of the ring announcing aspect of it. But yeah, all positive memories. But, you know, for you, when it came to your early days, you know, you're in the business now. Why don't you tell us about your early days of ring gear, you know, where you got it, because obviously you would go on to have a look where you had the, you know, the shiny pants and you pretty much had that for most of your run. But in your early days, what did you start with? And what was your very first entrance music?
All right. So gear was tough back then. So back then you would order from K&H,
Hmm.
and some days it would fit, some days it wouldn't. So when I started, I had bad knees. I had what I have at then. So what I had my knee scoped on my right, and I think of the ACL on the left. So I was wearing braces like Austin. So when I was looking for gear, I was looking for something kind of bulky, and I kind of did the Sabu pants.
Right.
I remember I got those originally from Adrian Street. It was black ones. And then that evolved. And my mom, when she found out about pro wrestling from like my birthday or Christmas, she made, you know, different colors. So I would have 8 to 10, you know, different pants like that because my mom made them, which was great. You know, which is another story because my mom hated pro wrestling.
I was just
Absolutely.
going to ask, how did your
Yeah, when I was a young kid, and to this day, she'll go, Christopher, I don't understand. That's the most disgusting thing in the world. You know, and the story behind that, when her and my dad were dating, I think my dad brought her to a wrestling event, which I believe was in Brockton, and of course somebody got busted open. There's blood all over the place. You know, and that was probably her first experience. And then I remember, you know, going back to WWF when the X's came back, and of course, mom would come in the room when there's blood all over the places and X's, you know.
right?
And so, but you know, but she supported it even though she doesn't understand it or didn't like it.
Hmm.
I think that's the important part is, you know, and a lot of people don't understand that. You know, you need a support system, and it's great, even though they don't like it, they still support you in your dreams. Which that's an awesome thing in general. That when you start training and being a pro wrestler, majority of people can't live up to their dreams. Yeah, and a lot of people, you know, they want to be a rapper, baseball player, football player, and pro wrestling is attainable. Just depends
Yeah.
on how far you go and what you do.
Right. And what did you use initially for that entrance music?
Let's see, that was a tough one because I used to listen to AAF back in the day, and I would hear some songs and you're trying to pick it out, and I can never remember what it was. So I was dating this young lady, and it came up. I'm like, "Hey, what's this song?" And then she goes, "Then I think she bought me the CD. It was Metallica,
Hmm.
Bellstone." And I've been using that like for 25 years. Usually that's
Yeah.
when we go out. Some days you modify it, you know, and so yeah, that's usually what I come out to, you know. But again, it was a process, and now obviously with copyright and you know it's a little bit different with some of the stuff.
Right.
Uh,
And why don't you tell us about the gimmick? You know, the gimmick that you came up with um, as a heel, basically. You know, your music would hit, you'd come out, and you were always one to get the crowd riled up. You know, and you're
yeah,
pointing in their face with that finger, and you'd always go off on the older people in the crowd, and it was beautiful. It was it just came together nicely. Why don't you tell us about that?
yeah, a lot of that. I mean, a lot of times you have a combination of different wrestlers in your head, and I always thought of Slaughter. Sergeant Slaughter, because like the big chin, the scowl and yelling at people. So I kind of took that from Slaughter. But the main thing is I'm a firm believer they have to love you or hate you.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key part. And some days I think that's what's missing nowadays. A lot of people are afraid to be that heel. They
Right.
want to be a cool heel, and I'm like, they have to love you. Wrestling to me is a black and white game. It is not gray. They can't kind of like you or kind of hate you. They have to dislike you or love you.
Hmm.
And that's what I knew my job was, is they have to hate me. When you used to get hit, with pocketbooks, that was awesome from like the grandmothers or the mother. That was awesome. You knew you did your job.
Yeah. And going back to the training aspect of it, how long were you there training in the school before you started actually, performing at shows? And who were some of the students that were in the same class as you at the school?
So I had a long open window for training. And when I started in May of 97, so we had, so who was it? It was, you had Bo in there. You had Bo, Wagner, Apocalypse, like, ironically, like those were the guys that I can remember like being either right before me or right after me. It was ironic because at the time, almost all of us were running wrestling schools, in New England. But what happened was with me, I had a couple of injuries. When I started about 5 or 6 months in, I kept popping my shoulder. So I had to take time off, got surgery, came back, started training, probably 6, 8 months, ready to go, thinking I'm ready to go. And then I blew out my knee. And that was out for 9 months. So, a lot of people would be like, you're done because of the injuries. And I always use that as a gut check because I never want like young people to get hurt, but some days they have to check, do they really want it?
Yeah.
Nowadays, a lot of times they make excuses. My car broke down, my goldfish drowned. It sounds funny, but it's just I'm not a believer in obstacles. I'm a believer in solutions. So if your car broke down, change your tire, get to practice a little bit later. Your girlfriend broke up with you, fantastic, right? Go through our door, make the night better, deal with it. We'll get a new girlfriend, the next day. So that's when I came back, whatever it was, I had my first match in Boston. It was September 25th, 1999. Tony Rummel was running. I think we found out now that was a food festival. Now I did not realize that because it was at Boston City Hall because we just knew it was a big show. And I liked Joe Davis doesn't get a lot of pops out there, but it was Joel. When I met Joel at TGA Fitness in Brockton on my crutches, I would go to rehab and then I would go to the gym to work out. And that's when I met Joel. So I started going to some of Joel's events for the NWA. And then I just started going there carrying my bag and something happened. And Tony's like, kid, you got your bag? I said, yep. And that was my first match versus one of the Gullah brothers. And, and the funny part about that, I remember going out there and it was like 3,000 people. I mean, in my mind, it was 3,000 people. I think there was more based on the, recent attendance that you can look up. But I just remember they all turned on me. And I'm like, I don't understand. I'm a baby. And, the match, it was what it was, you can have all the training you want, but you're in front of those fans. Some days, it probably wasn't the best match, but it was the first match in front of live people, and that kind of started everything. I thought I was going to be working NWA more, but then a couple weeks later, Tony died. I think the next event was supposed to be in Connecticut. I think I was supposed to work Gino, or that's supposedly, I think that was the thought. But obviously, when Tony died, things changed.
Yeah.
Then I started going to some of the events locally. Because again, we didn't have the internet back then. I remember I saw a flyer. I think my dad probably grabbed it. And back then, my family did not know I was training. They had no clue that I was training to be a pro wrestler. So I went to a show in Taunton at the ballroom, and that's when I met Joe Eugenio. And I remember him saying, if you want to come down, we have a training center in New Bedford, and which I had no idea. So I went down there, and one of the nights, same thing. I couldn't find the building. I'm like, people have a perception, what a pro wrestling gym would be, and this was, back what was I forget the superstore there was or supermarket, and you couldn't figure out how to get in there, so you finally went in there, went in the back, and again I hear kind of the bumping of the ring. I'm like, man, there's be tons of people here, man. There's a promotion. It's for like 20, 30 people there. And I believe it was Joe Eugenio, Don Vega, and his dad, Julio.
That's it.
That was it. And it kind of blew my mind. So I started, going really from Brockton to New Bedford because that's the promotion that I started working with. And obviously more people showed up. But back then, and even to now, each school on an average, they probably have 10 to 15 people that are always there. Then you have some people that come in less, and they have people drop in. So that part hasn't changed. But the thing I always gave credit for, with Don Vega, no matter who was there or wasn't there, he was still in there getting the reps, getting the bumps, and getting better. To this day, it's the same thing. Sometimes he'll text me, hey, Chris, I'm going up to the school, or hey, I just went to the school, and he would be by himself working out, bumping, rolling, working on stuff.
Wow. Yeah. Dedication. That's what it's all about, So that very same year, 1999, I believe it was SCCW, you'd work Amanda Storm one-on-one. What was that experience like?
Well, ironically, I'm not a big fan of, men wrestling women. To this day, I'm not a big fan of it. All right. But ironically, I think I started the craze in New England because at that time, Eugenio or Steve Ricard put me with Amanda, and I kind of made it cool to wrestle females. So I wrestled Amanda probably like for a year and a half, maybe 2 years between SCCW, YPW. Went to a high school, I was wrestling Amanda, and, it was what it was. It's like, this is the match. Let's make the best match of it.
Yeah.
Amanda, she was a bigger girl, but you treat her like everybody else. I think that's what got over, on that time. Like, I didn't bitch and moan about wrestling Amanda. The promoter wanted it, was what it was.
Yeah.
What
were some of your memories of Walter Killer Kowalski behind the scenes and even after your training as years would go on, any interactions you'd have with him?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably one of the biggest regrets I have in wrestling is not spending more time with Walter. And again, you don't know what you don't know. But at that time, a lot of guys would pick Walter up, drop him off, go out to dinner with him, kind of be that guy that would bring him around to different shows. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Or even, when I was out in injuries, nobody said, hey, kid, get your ass to practice. Sit down, grab a notebook, watch, sit next to Walter. No one told you back then because a lot of times, people, they would just wash out. So now I tell the kids that all the time. So that's probably one of the biggest regrets I have is not spending that time with Walter because how much knowledge could you have got just by spending all that time?
Right.
Like I know, I know Frank Kazarian did it, Frank Crane Dam, Apocalypse did. A lot of these guys did it, and you just didn't know. You didn't even know that was an option. And I wish I knew that because I would have spent all the time. I would have drove Walter everywhere, just to learn something, from the man.
Yeah. Well, about a year later, the year 2000, South Coast Championship Wrestling, you'd work with Don Juan DeSanto. Any memories working with him?
I don't. I mean, I remember wrestling, Sandy, but I don't. Some days we clicked, some days we didn't. And it was the same thing. You would have fun matches out there, depending where we're at Bob's Bar and Grill or wherever we're at. The matches, it was what it was, and Sandy's the kind of guy that, to this day you see him, I haven't seen him probably about a good 10 years, but you just remember the memories of what it was.
Right. An interesting six-man person, six-person bout that I wanted to write down here so I wouldn't forget it and bring it to your attention. So Dr. Heresy, Sweet Scott Ashworth, and Mr. Biggs, the man who says bigger is better, in a six-person tag against Edward G. Ecstasy, Chris Blackheart, and Rip Williams. This was 1999 South Coast Championship Wrestling. Any memories working with any of those guys?
Oh, bum bum. Was that at Hathaway Road, like on a Sunday show?
I'm not too sure. I just marked down 1999 on that one.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. So I'm not saying that's what it was, but this is the beauty, I guess, of being around such a long time.
Yeah,
You have so many matches that some days you just don't remember them until you see them.
right.
But the people involved, great guys. I mean, we know like Ashworth. Everybody loves Ashworth. Who was it? Ashworth. You have Heresy.
Heresy, Ashworth,
Yeah, who's still
uh,
kicking around.
Mr.
And then
Biggs.
Biggs. I mean, that's probably one of the times when I worked Biggs. I started working for Biggs for IEW.
Hmm.
So that's probably how that happened. And Mr. Biggs, I love Mr. Biggs. Mr. Biggs, Mrs. Biggs, great people.
That was my next question. Any particular memories over the years, with Chris or Mr. Biggs?
You know, to Chris, people don't realize that like Mr. Biggs would be like he would be the booker for it, but Chris would make sure everything was done. She would lay the law down between the ring getting set up, the ring was behind. And I remember like to this day, I remember I tell the guys, you guys are lucky, and I literally just said this in Taunton a couple weeks ago. I said, you guys are lucky that you have like a Kathy, who's my wife. Like she goes to all the shows, she typically runs the door, and she's firm on stuff, and she got that from Mrs. Biggs. Mrs.
Right.
Biggs, she would crack the whip, because I remember like the worst. I remember one of the memories for IEW. A lot of times the ring got up late, either right before the door or after the door was open. And I remember when we started running shows. I always hated that. That ring is the first thing people see. They should not see, the plywood or the padding or even, guys setting it up because it's all about the show and the perception of what the fans want to see.
Yeah.
But no, I like Biggs. I like Mrs. Biggs. I know we talked about before about St. John's Gym.
Yes.
That was a great place, and anything with mayonnaise, I never ate.
Right. That's right.
But on the other hand, too, like anytime, I went to wrestling shows, I usually never ate anyway.
Yeah.
I would always carry either like protein bars or dry oatmeal
Hmm.
because it's nothing worse than getting in that ring and your stomach's rumbling. So, everybody has a routine. My routine was usually cut down the water a couple hours before, bring, oatmeal or something that you could eat something and it wouldn't kill your stomach.
Yeah.
So it's not that I didn't like the potato salad, which I don't like potato salad anyway,
Right.
but I was going to eat it just for that. But I know a lot of the boys appreciate it. A lot of times when they ran events, especially I can remember St. John's Gym, they would be catered, which was good.
Yeah, and for the fans that don't know, yeah, they used to kind of do catering on the side, and they would do some special events for people. But specifically, St. John's Gym, they would make sure that their shows were catered. And at that time, Mr. Biggs was running the IWA, and then of course he would go on to do IIW along with others, Anthony Rufo and Tommy Degnan and whoever else was involved in that.
Yep.
Behind the scenes, and eventually Mr. Biggs would go on to run the WCWA, which was his last promotion that he would run. But always a positive experience. Always put on fun shows, and he and Chris were just very very nice people, and even though obviously she's running the show, she's stern, but if you have time or if she has time to actually sit down and chill out for a little while. Great person to talk to, was always, very nice. And I have fond memories of both of them. And unfortunately, we lost both of them so young, which was sad.
Well, and that was the good part back then. You had like some of the niches you said, you would have different promotions that you would work for. So we were working 2, 3, some days 4 days a week,
Right.
which was awesome. You would go like the SECW maybe on Friday or Saturday, fill it in with UCW or IIW, and typically on Sundays was Power League.
Yeah.
And the times were different. Like Power League, I think the greatest thing about Power League is no matter where guys came from, they all came for a purpose. And the only purpose was to put on a show to do a fundraiser and to have a good time wrestling. And a lot of people got their start there. A lot of people got their reps, from work for Tommy D. So Tommy D probably doesn't get enough thank you. But Tommy D is one of the good guys, that we had in wrestling.
Yeah.
And he had a formula that worked, and it wasn't about the money. It was about the wrestling.
Tommy was absolutely he's one of the nicest people you could ask for in the business. Very giving, very easy to work with. And, his, just his shows were like, it's hard to say, they were like reunions. They were always just so positive, and everybody's just kind of hanging out backstage. Everybody gets along, and it was just a good atmosphere at Power League. And he would always raise money for all different charities over the years. Most of the shows for Power League were charity shows.
Yes.
And he was always doing something for a good cause, and that's always nice to see as well.
Yeah, we liked it because when we were running the training center, we were bringing a lot of our guys down there. And I remember one of the shows we had, it was Pawtucket. I don't think it's the last one, but probably near the end. And it was doing it for a local, it was probably a Pawtucket Little League. And it was like 17 matches. And I remember I took one of the young kids, and he goes, "Hey, what are we going to do?" And I looked at the card, and we were like number 9 out of like 16. And I said, all we're going to do is when I turn around, give him a show attack from the top, 1, 2, 3. And that was it. And guess what? It got a huge pop. The kid got, some experience. And that's what it was about. Tommy D would give a lot of opportunity and allow us to bring guys there to get some reps in it, which I think is very important.
And another thing I should say about Mr. Biggs is, it was kind of nice that he had the whole family involved. Grandpa Joe would be, helping set up chairs. His mom would sometimes be helping sell tickets or whatever it may be. His father would always help with ring crew. And, his father was a funny guy, and it was easy to get him going. Sometimes you'd, pick on him a little bit. He'd chase you around the ring, some good memories with the whole family.
Well, and that's what people don't realize. I mean, there's not a lot of those guys left anymore.
No.
People who work for IIW, and I know TJ is still kicking around a little bit. Dan Badandi, we do a podcast every Thursday night, live every Thursday at SP Wrestling on YouTube. We run it out of Danny's studio. Danny wrestles for us time to time, so there's not a lot of people left, from that.
No, there really isn't. Yeah.
And it was funny. We had Jay Gillette come down a couple of days ago at the training center, and he's like, "Who's left for old guys?" I'm like, "Not a lot."
Yeah.
That just isn't. Either they're out of the business, and you have no idea where they are, or unfortunately they passed.
Right. Yeah, it's tough. It is a tough business, and obviously you can only put so many miles on the body, so sometimes careers aren't as long as you want them to be, but certainly lots of great memories back then. And another thing I should bring up, I do remember Mr. Biggs saying that it meant a lot to him to run the IWA at St. John's Gym specifically. The reason he was there was because Walter would run there years prior. So the IWF, would often be at St. John's Gym in Clinton, Massachusetts. So he enjoyed kind of continuing the wrestling legacy from that venue. My earliest memory from St. John's Gym is actually a Power League show, PLW. I remember Jim the Anvil Neidhart was on the show, and might have worked with Shane Simons. I can't remember, but
I think that was the match.
Yeah.
I don't think I worked that show, but I remember the match.
Yeah. So very, positive memories, of course, from that area and that time period. What would you say has been your greatest challenge thus far within the industry?
I would say it comes to different times in your life, to say the least. Because obviously the beginning was very challenging between the injuries and getting going. Because it's a lifelong dream. And, who would have thought you would have these injuries, and do you continue? So it really just depends. Starting showcase. That was tough because we had a game plan going in, and I don't know if you know the story on that one, but it was New Year's. It was either New Year's Day, New Year's Eve, and Paul Lazon was working for me at the mortgage company because I had my own brokerage at that time in Providence. So we sat down as New Year's, was shooting the shit, and it just came up about running promotion. And I'm like, huh, I'm not opposed to it, right? And that's really how Showcase was started. And, that was literally on, December 31st, and we started running shows in March. And the original, we had a meeting at Hooters, and we had guys fill out, waivers and W-9s. We do paperwork. We had a game plan going. In the first weekend, we had 3 shows. We had South Attleboro, we had Newberry, and we had Easton. We had a new ring, which was the low boy. And after that, we had a revamp, because what we did marketing-wise back then, you would do a lot of the polls, the rainbow posters, which we did. And we took a hit. The first year, we took, a lot of financial hits on the shows. But the one thing I felt as being a worker going into the promoting aspect was all about reputation and word. And it's not necessarily the reputation people give you and talk about, it's a reputation that you know what you've done. So anytime we ran events, we always had the funding. We always had the funds at the door, so it was never a issue of getting paid. But the first year, new equipment, new promotion, you would adjust accordingly based on it. And we did. We used to run it by payroll. That's a lot of times how we booked the card. And if you didn't have the funds, you shouldn't be running shows. And a lot of people forget that. So that was a challenge. And then, then we started, the training school. I think that was in 09 or 2010. And then, again, that happened by accident, Open a promotion was a conversation, not something that I planned on doing. It was just something that evolved in the business. Training center was the same way. We started a place in the bread factory in Central Falls, and there's stories there talking about haunted, man. That is, I can tell you stories down there about being haunted and different, but that evolved from there to we went down to Conduit Street, which is already down the street. And then we were looking for a place of where we are now. And we've been there, I think, about 14 years in Woonsocket, where we can do, training, birthday parties, and events. So it's an evolution, and then like COVID, a lot of people shut down during COVID. We were one of the first people, or at the time, we were doing training online. We did training online. I remember we had Savio Vega, on the line. That was a hookup from Don Vega, which was phenomenal, And that was a survival period. What do you do when you can't do anything?
Right.
So we ran training online via Skype or Zoom. We started doing the events, limited events at the training center. And that was a changing point too. We stepped up the production. Julio, who was Don Vega's nephew, stepped up. Has done great stuff with that production wise. So I said the greatest challenge in this business is you have to keep evolving. We did that about 3 years ago when we got an opportunity to work with, Kenny Doan. That was an accident. That was a phone call based on reputation. Don Vega knew Kenny more than I did based on the shows that he was spotter. And we had a conversation regarding bringing Kenny in. And from there was another evolution. Our job before that, we were transitioning. We wanted to make not just, indie wrestlers. We want to get people signed to solidify the reputation of what we do. And that's when Kenny came in. Kenny kind of solidified what we do. And people don't realize this. A lot of times, Kenny and ourselves, we don't have conversations regarding what we're doing, but we have conversations to continue what we're doing. Because it all comes down to basics, the foundation, and fundamentals. And that's what we've done. And we used to never get the credit for it. But with Kenny, we have a good group of guys, and Kenny reinforces that based on what we do. So we have a great relationship with Kenny because of that, because we're all on the same page. And that's the important part. Right now, there's a couple of schools around here. People have a lot of old reputations in New England, but they don't have a lot of new ones. And, we've had guys going to TV, the last about 2 years. It was about a year before we got people in from there. But we're not the new guys on the block, but we have a new era of young talent who hopefully are going to be the breakout stars, in this industry, and that's awesome for us because that just shows you when between all the things that we've done in the past and changing it, between the trainers that we have 5 different trainers 3 days a week, but it's a change in the modification. Something's going to change, but I think the difference is we're getting a recognition based on what we're doing.
And students can get trained by, the likes of yourself, the Punisher Don Vega, Sergeant Muldoon, John Callahan, who obviously has lots of WWF experience, and Ken Dykstra with WWE experience. Who is the 5th trainer?
We have Brett Ryan Goslin, one of our,
Yes.
Brett drops in quite frequently. He's usually there with Sarge on Tuesday night, and I think that's the awesome part of it. You have 5 different people knowing the foundation of what you need, and slightly different way to teach it or bring it across. And I think it goes down to kind of like the beginning is in this business, you gotta change. Like I had a longer career as someone who was training and running shows than I did as an active wrestler. And I think people don't realize that you don't have to be the greatest wrestler in the ring because it's different training. Training people and have the patience to learn and critique and deliver on that and build and rebuild people, that's a skill. I think a lot of people forget about that. They see a name on a marquee, and the marquee name may not be training, or they may not have the skills to actually implement and help you. Because a lot of times in the past, that it was a gimmick. It was a gimmick. They would say, "Hey, come and learn how to train for wrestling," and you would only see that person once a month when it was time to pay the money to train.
Yeah.
That was it.
So while we're on that topic, why don't you, for those that are tuning in now that are maybe thinking about, entering the business or whatever it may be, why don't you just quickly, once again, tell us where the school is, name of the school, how people can reach you guys, social media, all of that.
Yeah, and I'll give you an insight too of how to choose a school because that's a big difference too. But we train Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday nights, 6:30 to 9:30 in Woonsocket, Rhode Island. It's an easy drive from Boston, Worcester. It's right in literally the heart of Woonsocket. We have 5 different trainers. You can find everything online at showcaseprowrestling.com. All the social media is SP Wrestling. You're always welcome to come down. We usually do a pretty good interview with people who are looking, at schools. And I tell them the first thing you have to do, you got to check out the environment. Go to the school, check out the environment to find out is right for you. Don't go by what you see online. Don't go by what somebody tells you. Go down and check it out to make sure it's right for you. Because just because they did something 5 years ago or 10 years ago does not mean they're doing it now. We have people talk to people who are training there right now on the side, say, hey, talk to them, ask all your questions. Then we have them either come back for, watch class that night or another time. Because the main thing is that if you're going to go there and spend like half your week at a school, you want to make sure it's the right environment for you, and you always want to show up. And that's one thing that we do. I will give anyone the opportunity if they're going to put in the work. The problem with that some days, you get a lot of people that need a lot of work to get to certain stages. If they're willing to put in the work, we will make you a pro wrestler. No idea how far you're going to go. Well, put in the work, and we will make that dream happen.
And on the flip side of your greatest challenge within the industry, what would you say has been the most rewarding for you in this industry?
It is very rewarding when you see someone, from where they started to where they are now. And that's huge. Because like we have a young kid, Danny Cabral, right? Danny is a great kid, but he's not the same kid he was 3.5, 4 years ago. Inside the ring and outside the ring, between the confidence, how he carries himself, how he wrestles. We gave him life skills that he's applying outside. So I love when we can change people for the positive and to make their world and their life better.
When it comes to the third person in the ring, the referee, very important role. Obviously, I'm assuming your school, you're able to teach all different aspects of the business, not just in ring, so referee, ring announcer,
Mhm.
all aspects like that.
Absolutely, because when somebody is training with us, they learn from the ground up. They're learning respect, they're learning psychology, they're learning the basics, setting up the ring, breaking down the ring announcing, refereeing, because you don't know what they may like or how their life changes. And a lot of times, like we do birthday parties after school, so a lot of times when guys are starting, they just need some reps, and there's nothing more honest than a 5-year-old kid, you know, and which is awesome. And I would never make somebody be fill in the blank. But if they want to transition, to a referee or a ring announcer, that's fine. But to me, if you want to be a wrestler, let's make you into a wrestler. And then once you have a couple of matches, maybe find out, is that right for you? But there's nothing like it. It's the greatest feeling in the world going through that curtain.
The year 2000, Power League Wrestling, you would go one-on-one with Nick Steele, the late Nick Steele. What are some memories you could share with the fans of Nick Steele and what he was like behind the scenes?
Well, I love Nikki, right? I knew Nikki at a different time. Because at that time, Nikki was a stepdad. He had a young kid. So we used to hang out with him. We used to go to his house in Taunton, go out to dinner, him and his now ex-wife. But then you hear stories down the line when Nikki was, trainer more full time down at, top rope, and it was totally different. But people like, you call him Nikki? It's like, yeah, it's Nikki. It's Nick Steele, right? Very passionate. Nick loved the business. He got the passion from his dad. Nick was one of the good ones, and especially I think it's 6 years now, which to his passing. I did not realize that time flew.
Yeah, that's crazy.
But yeah, Nick was one of the good ones. Nick loved wrestling, and my impression is he wanted the guys to respect it, and he wanted them to put in the work. And that's all as a trainer you can ask the guys to do.
We talked about the referee and how that's a important role in the wrestling business. Have you had a favorite referee to work with all these years?
I always like Old Man Tom. Old Man Tom is one of my favorites because I made him part of the match and part of the show, and he loved that. I used to harass Tom. I used to grab his shirt. I used to grab him and say something. He loved it. He goes, Chris, thank you for making me involved in the match. People forget that. A referee can make or break a match. They can either make it better or they make it worse. And Old Man Tom definitely enhanced the match. And I always liked the fact that he enjoyed it. And he allowed me to get over better as a heel because of the interaction I had with him.
And you're traveling to all these shows for so many years. What are some of your favorite venues over the years that you've wrestled in?
Everybody says the PAL, right? And PAL was great. The thing I liked about the PAL was the fact that we built that house. We would have 300 or 400 people there just for us. And then when I started running shows ourselves, we loved the Moose Lodge because the Moose Lodge was the same thing. Moose Lodge, I was connected it going back to Mr. Biggs. It was always a great crowd there, and then even like our training center in Woonsocket, great vibe. I love seeing when you can build a house and it's the house that Showcase built. And it's just not me, as everybody involved. And then, Taunton, the VFW, Taunton, that was something that we built. Nobody ran that venue, and we built that, to what it was. So usually my favorite venue now in general is wherever we hold Marchiversary. It's the biggest show of the year is our WrestleMania. It's just a different vibe in the air. And that's the part that I love.
And early on in your career, you would go on to team up with one of your friends, the Punisher Don Vega, and you guys would, kind of rock it all around New England for many years as a tag team. Why don't you just let us know how that started, how you guys paired up initially, and some memories of Richie?
That started by accident. For some reason, Steve Ricard had us tag in Seekonk. I have no idea why. He could have thought that these two guys are a pain in the ass. Let's put them together, But for some reason it worked, We didn't look the same. We didn't wrestle the same. But I think the things that made it work is like we always on that small part we wore different gear, but we always try to match different colors,
Hmm.
to blend. But the thing that really made it work was training. We would go to train together. We would go to the gym together. We would go to wrestling train together. We would put the time in and not just show up and wrestle together. And I think that's a lot of things what's missing. I like tag team wrestling. It's definitely an art form and it's a lost art form because I don't think people put the time in work as a tag team. They just work as two individuals.
And another person you work with for Power League Wrestling, the year 2000, was Iron Fist, who initially started with Yankee Pro Wrestling. Any memories working with Iron Fist?
I think I only worked them maybe twice.
Hmm.
I'm saying the first time I remember, I believe it was a 6-man in Braintree. I could be wrong, but I think that was it. And then the second time would be for Powerhouse, but I don't have any memories. So if you find a clip, send it to me because I definitely forgot about it.
In 2001, the Powerhouse Brawl at the West Warwick Civic Center for Power League Wrestling. West Warwick Civic Center, another favorite for a lot of wrestlers as far as venues go. And, WWF has been there and in their earlier days. 2001 specifically, you would wrestle old school Derek Destiny at the West Warwick Civic Center. Memories of working with Chris.
I like Derek. Derek was fun. You knew what it was. It was going to be a comedy match, which was great. Easy to work with. I think I like. Did he have a manager back then? A female manager back then? Well, it's 2001. He didn't because we brought his teacher involved probably like in '09 or '08. So
I know
I
he
think,
had,
yeah, 7 years later when he had his teacher come out, I think that was a better gimmick.
yeah.
One because we help evolve that, but Derek was easy and Derek was fun.
Hmm. I know he had Sandy Starr for the longest time.
Yeah, no, that wasn't his teacher. His
Yeah.
his current wife was his teacher. I'm not sure what came first. I think they were dating first,
Yeah,
and
Tamara.
then I said, "Hey, I have an idea. Why don't we try this?" And I love the gimmick that they did because Chris was, the schoolboy Derek Destiny. No matter what he did, if he didn't do it how she wanted to, she would change the finish of the match and have the referee restart it, and then Derek would lose.
Right.
So if he didn't follow it to the T, like the teacher said, or she would put him in the corner, like literally in the corner of the venue.
Yeah.
Awesome. So
Yeah.
yeah, so yeah.
And Lynn, Massachusetts, St. Michael's Hall. It's 2004 for the WWA.
Yeah.
And you would go one-on-one with Richie, the Punisher Don Vega. When you're so used to teaming with him all the years, what was it like working with Richie in the ring?
Oh, that was the day of a lot of firsts. So that was the first time I really met Spada, the first time I worked for Spada, the first time I wore trunks, and the first time I was really a baby.
Hmm.
So I remember the ring itself was higher, as in it was weird. That Spada ring was a little bit higher than the ropes were than the normal rings. And I know I wasn't the best match because it's definitely at that time I wasn't working as a baby. I wasn't a great baby. Our promoters tell me do not work as a baby, but that's what Spada wanted. So yeah, to this day, I remember Richie would be here, look at it, it's like, man, that match was the shits, right? And do you know what it was? It was, you know. And I remember one day that's the first day I think I met Brittany Brown in person.
Mm-hmm.
The first I remember Spotter, and to this day, right? We tell guys to do things that the promoter wanted. He wanted me to be an Indian, right? And I'm like, I don't want to be an Indian. But I should have picked it up and ran with it at that time because as crazy as Mike was, he had ideas, and I probably would have worked for Mike, because I only worked for Mike once because again, it was a bad match. But what I should have done, I should have kept going to shows, with Vega. I should have went, again, would have, should have. Just because they didn't like me that night, I should have showed up to other events and did the camps that he did, you know.
Right.
And this is what I try to, the next generation that we're training is like, we made mistakes in pro wrestling. Our job, one of them is to make sure you don't make those mistakes or lessen the mistakes.
Yeah. It was nice having Dr. Tom there. He was pretty much at every show while I was there, as a talent scout for WWF. And, um, everybody kind of gave it 110%,
Yeah.
knowing that he was watching. So it kind of elevated everybody's, efforts, which was good. And, yeah, just an overall good experience working for Mike, like I mentioned earlier. Um, but other promotions, Extreme, NWW Extreme for James Allen, you would work there many times. But 2004, specifically against Travis Funk, one of the grizzly vets of New England, on half of the Silver Stallions. Any memories of Travis Funk, Mr. Orlando?
Yeah. I mean, I wrestled Travis Funk for various promotions, various gimmicks, and between Travis Funk, Gary Gold, we wrestled them, for YPWS, SCCW, IIW, Trooper. It doesn't really matter. He was a guy who used to have an easy match, and it was what it was.
Yeah. Any stories behind the scenes of Mike Spada? Any funny stories or memories from that one show you were at?
No, I mean, because I just remember going in and I had long hair, I was tanned up, and for some reason he thought I was an Indian. I should have said, "Great, where can we pluck a turkey and give me feathers at night?"
Right.
That's probably what I should have said. But yeah, I mean, the stories out there, Spot, they're not my stories, so I'm not going to tell them. But if you want stories on Spada, reach out to Vega.
Oh, yeah.
Because he has great stories because he was there all the time.
Yeah. We had Vega on the podcast, and he had some good ones for sure. Another promoter, Anthony Rufo, the late great Anthony Rufo. Of course, he wrestled for the New England Wrestling Alliance. For those that don't know him, he was Dambula, then he became Marvin the Maniac. He was heavyweight champion there for a couple years there. Would go on to start UCW, Unified Championship Wrestling. He was the promoter there, also wrestled there as Mr. Troubleman. And, of course, he was the winner of the King of Chaos tournament in Chaotic Wrestling, would be a regular in the early days of Chaotic Wrestling as Ali Muhammad or Muhammad the Butcher. Had a really good run in New England, one half of the Millennium Killers with Gino Martino, and then would go on to run UCW once again. This time, instead of Unified, it was Ultimate Championship Wrestling. What are some of your, and of course his big role in IIW as well, what are some of your memories of Anthony Rufo over the years?
I always liked Anthony. Anthony gave me a great opportunity. Even people forget that they used to run a training school on Valley Street.
Yeah.
So when I started working for them, I started going down to the Valley Street, and that's when Biggs was there, Anthony was there. So, I think Anthony gave me the opportunity. Anthony was always good to me, a good guy, and the key thing was just show up, go to the shows, and even when he passed, it was a loss to us. And don't even tell me how long that was, because I was that 12, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
I don't remember, but those are the guys that the generation now won't remember. They don't know. And I wish some of the older guys were still around, because I love when we get older guys coming down to either the shows or the training, because when they see it different, because they're their older guy, but they're giving back. I think that's one thing that's, again, definitely missing, is the giving back to the business. Some people can't do it.
Yeah.
Some people, once they're out of the cycle of being a pro wrestler, they can't, change in the business or do something else, or they just can't be around it. But when they can, I put this out there: any veteran who you haven't been around for a while, come on down. You're always welcome.
And that, I like to use this platform, this podcast, to keep those names and keep those memories alive. And that's why I often bring up a lot of people that have passed on, that maybe the fans or, young wrestlers that are tuning in, they've maybe never heard of, but they'll learn about them in different stories and memories, on these episodes. And I think it's important to keep that memory alive for all the people who have kind of paved the way before, this generation. And a lot of that obviously was not caught on film. There's not as much out there as you'd like there to be. And so it's good to hear the stories of people that were actually there and worked with these guys.
Absolutely.
So when it comes to advice, what would you say is the best piece of advice that you've received in this business so far?
I'm going to tell you the advice that I tell all the young guys and gals who start. Open your ears and shut your mouth. You are going to get more opportunities by doing that than you are regarding complaining and bitching or not knowing. Because in this business, it's not what you say, it's what other people say you said. So if you never said it, you can't get yourself in trouble.
Right.
The second thing I would say, show up. Whenever there's an event, just show up. You can't learn if you're not in the environment. I tell that from the people who sign up right out of school. Come to every show, you're going to learn something, and that's huge. In this business, if you're not learning, you're dying for the fact that you have to constantly know what's going on. You have to learn different techniques. You have to keep modifying what you're doing, and we've done that over 30 years. And if anything, always bit better. You got to be open minded. You don't know everything just because you're running the ship, and a lot of people are very close minded with that.
And if you had to choose one, what has your favorite promotion been to work for over the years?
Besides myself, which ironically, I haven't wrestled a lot for myself because it's very hard to run a show and, run a show and wrestle. But out of the St. Paul League, just because Tommy gave a lot of opportunity to guys, and it was just the atmosphere. So, Tommy D, great guy. Definitely, they don't make him like that anymore.
Any memories from APCW, Action Packed Championship Wrestling, your time there?
Yeah, I mean, that was, Danny Boy, great guy. I just saw him recently. They had a training center right down the street from us in Pawtucket, right across. They started there. People don't realize they started there before Bob. Bob used to rent out the place before he made Slam Tech.
Yeah.
So great guys. Again, it was opportunity. When I left or SCCW, YPW, and they're going through changes, I was going down to APCW. We'll go down there. I think it was Wednesday nights. We'll go down there for training, and they ran shows, and it was good.
If you had to pick three, you're looking at your career as a whole. Top three matches, in your opinion, or opponents, if you don't remember the matches.
That's tough. One, because I forget half of them, to say the least.
Well,
But
maybe.
the first one was the best one, I would say, just because you finally broke through, right? Then I would say, I want to say wrestling Amanda, but it was just different.
Yep.
And then see, third one. I have a third favorite, and the one I always remember is the one on my birthday when I split my head open. It was a tag match. It was me and Nikki versus Johnny Angel and the Hot Boys, and I just remember it because I think it was the Hot Boy jumped off the top and he hit me, and I had blood coming down, and I remember I put my hand up to signal to Kathy because she was in the crowd back then, and the blood was coming down. She was so excited that I reached out to and acknowledged her. That's what she thought, right? Which I never did, because when you're in character, I'm a firm believer when you are who you are until you leave the car to go back into it. But it was my birthday. I split my head open. It was just, I remember that just because of the day. And then after that, we went to the hospital and we had to get checked. But yeah, that was just a funny memory. And then looking back at it, because Nikki was in it, But yeah, any times we have many great memories wrestling at the Fisherman's Hall for SCCW. And even Ricardo. Ricardo doesn't, get the credit that he deserved. He did a lot of shows back then. And a lot of us, again, that's where we got our reps.
Yeah. Any memories of the late Chief Dave Fox?
I don't. I mean, I worked the locker room with Dave. I know the day that he passed, I wasn't booked. Well, I wasn't told I was booked, but I should have showed up because, again, a young, stubborn kid. That's the day that he passed in Attleboro. So I should have been there, but I just wasn't. But Dave was an older guy. I remember going driving. I think it was with I want to say it was with Joe Davis, and I think Travis Funk to his funeral. So I didn't know Dave well, but I just remember that day that he died. I should have been there.
Yeah. Yeah, they had a very nice ceremony for him. I remember I was there. They had a dinner afterwards, and I remember Chief Jules Strongbow came out to pay his respects, and there was a good turnout. Lots of family, lots of wrestlers from all over. So definitely a nice showing. Nice guy. Had him on an episode of my talk show. Quiet guy. But he had a great run. I mean, he wrestled all over. All different territories, and just a genuinely nice guy. You don't get too many of those. So let's talk about a dream match. If you could put a dream match together, have a little fun with this. Any era, could be before your time, while you're in the ring, or somebody that's upcoming now. Who would that dream match be? Whether it be on somebody from television, somebody on the indies.
My, I mean, Flair would be the one. I grew up watching Flair. He was my favorite as a kid. So that would be the match.
Yeah,
At that time, Capsule was available. Yeah, that
doesn't
would be
get
the
much bigger than that.
Oh yeah.
How about Freight Train Dan? Any memories of working with Freight Train over the years? A long stay here in New England area.
Dan was one of the trainers at Kowalski.
Hmm.
Again, Dan's forgotten hero. He was Walter's one of Walter's right hand man, but Dan was there from day one. Dan was always a good guy. He would help everybody. So, if have you had him on the podcast?
He is scheduled, I think, 2 weeks from now.
Fantastic. Yeah, I know. A good guy, great stories, and I wish it was more people like Dan.
Yeah. Now, Mount Rushmore, chiming in your inner fan, who would your Mount Rushmore be for pro wrestling on the television side of things or territories?
Yeah.
Any era, and you can look at it any way you want. Who made the most money? Personal favorites, any way you want to do it.
All right. How many people?
4.
4.
Top 4 of all time.
Well, I'm a little biased on these, to say the least, but I would put Flair on it. I like a lot of the older guys, because that's what I grew up with. But they also made the foundations. You got Flair, you got Cornette, you got Hogan, and Cena.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Cena.
You got to look too fit. They got to put Kowalski down there because that's the cornerstone of New England is Killer Kowalski.
So when it comes to Mount Rushmore, chiming in your inner fan, who would your Mount Rushmore of pro wrestling be? Any era, and it could be current wrestlers, people before you, whoever it may be.
All right, so I'm going to go with I got to put Flair on it because he was all my all-time favorite. But even work rate, people don't realize the work rate he did and what he did. So you got Flair, you other got Hogan because Hogan blew everything up. You got Kowalski. I love Cornette, so I'm throwing Cornette on it. Cornette was definitely a manager who did a lot of things inside and out. And then I'm going to throw Cena in.
Awesome. And then on the New England side of that, for the male wrestlers specifically, New England specific, who would your Mount Rushmore be? Top 4.
I'm going to be biased on this one because it's going to be people that either I know or I know what they're doing. So the first 2 are going to be easy. The first one's going to be Don Vega. I mean, people do not know the dedication that he's done over 30 years and the work that he does. Definitely undervalued. A lot of young kids, they don't know, they don't know his work rate because they run in different circles. The second one, I'm going to throw in there Sean Candido. People forget this. We started with Candido back in the Fisherman's Club, back for Ricard. And, to this day, he's having better matches now than he did 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
Which is huge. So the other 2, there's obviously guys from the area that you like. Those are only 2 that I want to put on the Mount Rushmore. Just because, those are 2 guys I'm around all the time. I see the body of work. I see what they do. But I mean, I would say, ironically, the promoters, period. The people who run, actually it's 2, right? So one's going to be the promoters. People do not know what we do and the sacrifices that we go through between financially, emotionally, time-wise. There's a lot of stuff there, which goes in the 4th one. It's going to be the spouses. Like my wife, she's not a big fan of wrestling. She always did it. When we were dating, she used to be reading a book, and videotaping with Julio, you know. But she's been there almost 30 years. So, and those are the people that definitely people they don't get the recognition of what they just what they get, what they deserve from everything that we have to do, the time that's being put aside. The family of the promoters and even those who run training schools is a lot of is a lot of time you're away putting into a business that necessarily doesn't give back to you.
And do you still have a lot of your matches on film?
I do. I have the tapes, for it, so I could go start going through them. There's a lot of them.
I was going to say, did you
Um,
ever think about putting them out on online or?
yeah, no, I could do that. I mean, I love when people um, bring up footage and they show it to you, and I'm looking like I have no idea about that match,
Yeah,
and but the idea is I know what's out there, and it's just like, oh man. But I think that was a good part too because you did so much back then that you probably didn't remember everything because of it. Not everything was a moment, but it was just literally it was a way of life.
right.
I remember wrestling. All you would do throughout the weekend was wrestle, and when you didn't wrestle, that was like, hey, what do I do? This is not normal.
Yeah.
And it's a little bit different now. It's not as many shows, as there was years ago. So it's just different.
Yeah, like you said before earlier in our interview, back then you could easily wrestle Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, sometimes twice on one of those days or two of those days.
Yeah.
So there was a lot back then, a lot of different promotions. Wrestling is thriving now. I must say, like a lot of these promotions that I see, I'm not involved in the indie side of it anymore. But I see, the photos and the videos, and I mean, some of the crowds are unbelievable. They're in the thousands,
Mhm.
and it's great to see that. And wrestling is thriving. There aren't as many shows like you said, but the ones that are here are seem to be impactful and doing the right thing for the most part. So that's a positive thing for New England. Closing out Mount Rushmore, the women of New England specifically. Who would your top four of all time be?
So that's a tough one. I got to be biased again.
That's fine.
Yeah, do you know what it is? Because like Amanda, because I worked with her. She kind of started something way back then, and I know I'm gonna get flat. I'm putting Sandy Starr up there.
Hmm.
Sandy was a worker. Different generation. She always gave back. She always tried to help and improve the match, depending on who she was managing. You know, and then there's a lot of good young female talent, out there now. That probably instead of putting two more, I just want to give advice. With the young ladies, right? Wrestle, get the training. Don't let anyone stop you. But I'm a big fan. Like we had a girl came up from Virginia to train with us on Monday. And a lot of times girls, they wrestle like girls. I think they have to be gritty. They have to get in there with the guys and they have to be impactful, kind of like Molly Holly was,
Yeah.
and the girls figured some of them, they're killing it, which is awesome.
Yeah.
So just put in the work, wrestle anyone. Don't be afraid to wrestle the guys. Put the work in, work hard, and you guys have more opportunities than the guys do. Just do not just try to wrestle and get booked because you're a female. Improve your craft, get better, and a lot of you guys are going to succeed quicker than any other guys, that you're training or wrestling with.
It's great where women's wrestling has come, from where it was just 10 years ago. And,
Yeah.
you see the 30 women Royal Rumble in WWE, the fact that they have 30 women to fill that up and, they can't even fit all of their female roster in the Royal Rumble. They have more beyond that. And most of them are just so talented. So that is great to see. And, and even here in New England on the indie scene, there's a lot of great female talent now, and you get them from different areas as well. And
Mhm.
there's so much talent out there that are, the next. They're the tomorrow for television. They'll be there eventually, and really making a name for themselves. And with the WWE ID program, you're seeing a lot of people, get noticed, which I think is a good thing. Certainly something to look out for. A lot of great names being picked up. So, and then in closing, fast forward many years from now, looking back at your career as a whole, what would you say is your legacy? How do you want to be remembered?
Probably the biggest thing is I made the industry better. I made people better, and I gave opportunity. That's one thing we've always done since we opened our doors in '07. If it was from training or shows, we gave opportunity. And you can't get better without opportunity, and that's one of the key parts. So hopefully we made the New England landscape better and just pay forward to the next generation.
And if you had to pick one moment, what would that number one moment in your entire run be? Whether it be in the ring, out of the ring, behind the scenes, just that personal moment that really meant the most to you in your entire career so far.
I would say when we had one of our first events to crown the Showcase Pro Wrestling Heavyweight Champion. People don't realize this. When we started in '07, we didn't have a champion. We had the belt, thanks to Paul Lazan. He actually designed it, but we didn't have champions. So the first time we were crowning heavyweight champions, about 2.5, 3 years in, and we came up with a concept of basically the Royal Rumble, where the fans would choose the entry. Legitimate random poll, which you do this day, is not a work, everything's legit. And you can do pinfall by, you can win by either pinfall or submission being thrown over the top. So that's a concept we came up with. One of the greatest things that came from that was the first time we crowned the heavyweight champion. It was myself and 4 other people, and I had them pair up. I said, you two figure out a finish, 2 finishes, and you two figure out 2 finishes. When we're the last 5, I'm going to tell you who's going over. And everybody thought in true fashion, a promoter puts himself over. So I remember I said to the 2 people, I said, hey, you guys are out. And I said, congratulations to Nicholas Knight. Nicholas Knight went over the heavyweight champion. And at that time, Nick was a young guy. He was a smaller guy. No one really pushed him that heavy, that level. And that's what we did. For 2.5 years, we pushed, and people loved to hate him, which was great. Some places they would love him. Some days they would hate him. But I could tell when we did that, we did it for the right reasons to make somebody and bring them that to the next level. And that's one thing we do pretty well with our talent. We started with Nicholas Knight 19 years ago, and to this day, we have a formula that we're currently using that we're going to do that to the next generation.
Chris, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate you taking the time, and it's been great to catch up and chat all about your career.
I do appreciate it.
Absolutely. For Chris Blackheart from Brockton, Massachusetts, the city of champions, I'm Joseph Bruen, and this has been the All Access Entertainment Podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Leave your comments. Love to hear from you, the fans, what you thought about this episode and what you'd like to see in the future. And we will see you all next time.